There's a moment every trader remembers. The day the screen went dark, the numbers froze, and you realized your money wasn't coming back. For me, that moment was November 2022, the day FTX collapsed. I remember staring at my phone, watching the withdrawals freeze, seeing the tweets pour in. Funds are safe, they said. But deep down, I knew the tone of desperation in those words. I had heard it before, in 2008, in 2015, in every meltdown that started with overconfidence and ended in chaos. FTX wasn't supposed to fail. It was the darling of the crypto world, backed by celebrities, praised by regulators, adored by the media. Sam Bankman-Fried was the JP Morgan of crypto, they said. He wore t-shirts and drove a Corolla, a symbol of modest genius. The industry saw him as the moral compass that would lead digital finance into legitimacy. And yet, within 72 hours, billions of dollars vanished into a black hole of trust. But this story isn't about FTX alone. It's about what happens when a market built on leverage, illusion, and human greed finally cracks under its own weight. It's about how faith, once broken, spreads like contagion, not just through the exchanges, but through every trader's heart. I had money on FTX, not much by hedge fund standards, but enough to hurt. I remember refreshing my account thinking, maybe it's just a delay. Maybe they'll fix it. But markets don't wait for hope. They punish it. What shocked me most wasn't the loss of money. It was the loss of certainty. For years, I'd told myself I could read the crowd, sense when euphoria was turning to fear. But that week, everyone, from seasoned pros to newcomers, fell for the same lie, that someone out there was too smart to fail. And that's the real story I want to tell today. Not the fall of one exchange, but the collapse of trust itself, the invisible currency that holds every market together. Because when trust dies, even the strongest system becomes dust.
I've spent 15 years trading through bull runs, crashes, and sideways markets that test your sanity. I've seen the faces of fear on trading floors and the madness that comes when everyone thinks they've found a shortcut to wealth. When I first discovered crypto, I was skeptical. I came from traditional finance, the kind where you learn to read balance sheets, not memes. But around 2017, I started noticing something different. The people making real moves weren't wearing suits anymore. They were coders, gamers, and idealists talking about decentralization like it was a revolution. By 2020, it felt like the entire world had joined in. Governments printed trillions, inflation was rising, and for the first time in decades, regular people had access to a market not controlled by Wall Street. Bitcoin was breaking records, Ethereum was evolving into something more than a token. It was an ecosystem. And right in the middle of it all was FTX. FTX had style. Their interface was clean, the liquidity deep, and the branding flawless. The man behind it, Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, was everywhere. On stage with presidents, donating millions to charity, promising a safer, more transparent financial system. To the outside world, he looked like the antidote to the excesses of Wall Street. To traders like me, he looked like the future. I opened an account early. The spreads were tight, the funding rates fair, and for once, it felt like someone had built a platform for traders. I even moved part of my long-term portfolio there. Why not? FTX wasn't some shady offshore site. It had billion-dollar investors, regulators visiting the Bahamas headquarters, even ads during the Super Bowl. It was everything crypto had been waiting for. Legitimacy. But that's the thing about markets. The moment you stop questioning what's under the surface, you start building your confidence on air. I remember one night in 2021, during the Bitcoin rally, Prices were surging past $60,000. FTX volume was exploding, and I was in a trading chat with a few old friends. Someone joked, SBF is the new Warren Buffett. We laughed, but in the back of my mind, I felt a chill, because I'd heard this story before. Every generation has a hero, the one who promises to rewrite the rules. And every generation forgets how quickly the crowd turns from worship to betrayal. At the time, I brushed it off. The trades were good, the system worked, and the money flowed. But even as I made profits, I couldn't ignore one detail. Everything about FTX revolved around one man. Not a team, not a system, a single charismatic genius. And that's never a good sign in finance. Still, when you're in the middle of a bull market, logic becomes background noise. You tell yourself this time is different, that the data backs it up, that the regulators are watching. But deep down, everyone knows bull markets breed blind spots. FTX wasn't just a company, it was a belief system that the crypto world could finally be safe. And when a belief like that takes hold, it's not the charts you need to worry about. It's human psychology.
By early 2022, FTX wasn't just another crypto exchange. It was the exchange, the heartbeat of a global movement that believed technology could fix everything wrong with traditional finance. Everywhere you looked, FTX was there, sponsoring stadiums, buying Super Bowl ads, partnering with celebrities, and promising a level of safety the crypto space had never seen before. It wasn't just a company, it was a brand of trust. And in trading, trust is currency. Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, played his role to perfection. The unkempt hair, the t-shirts, the humble, effective altruist narrative. It was the anti-Wall Street persona people were starving for. He wasn't a banker, he was a builder, a genius who claimed to care about ethics, not yachts. He promised transparency, efficiency, and a new kind of finance that was supposed to serve everyone. For traders like me, it was easy to get pulled in. FTX offered leverage up to 20x with smooth execution, a custom-built derivatives platform, and deep liquidity that made every other exchange feel archaic. We were making money day after day. The market rewarded belief, and belief rewarded risk. But here's the truth I learned the hard way. The more control you think you have in markets, the less you actually do. At the time, I was running multiple positions across Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana, many of which were collateralized on FTX. The UI was seamless, the risk engine stable, every margin call, every liquidation seemed clean, fair, predictable. We believed the system was solid because it looked solid. But under the hood, something darker was growing. Behind the marketing, behind the billions in daily volume, there was a private hedge fund, Alameda Research, deeply entangled with FTX in ways no one fully understood. Alameda wasn't just another market maker. It was FTX's secret twin. Same founder, same capital, different rules. In hindsight, it's terrifying how many red flags were hiding in plain sight. FTX's own token, FTT, made up a huge part of Alameda's balance sheet, a token they could print, use as collateral, and recycle back into their books. It was financial alchemy, value created out of thin air. But when you're making money, red flags look like decorations. I remember attending a crypto conference in Singapore that year. SBF was on stage with regulators, fund managers, and tech entrepreneurs. He talked about responsibility, risk management, and building a lasting ecosystem. People applauded like he was a prophet. I applauded too. That's the seductive part of success stories. They make you forget to ask hard questions. We were so desperate for a hero in crypto that we ignored the most basic principle of markets. If something looks too good to be true, it probably is. Around that time, whispers started spreading. Questions about how Alameda always seemed to escape liquidation, how its trades never failed, how it always had perfect timing. Some said it was just skill. Others said it was insider data. I wanted to believe it was skill, because if it wasn't, then everything we were building belief on would collapse. In trading, denial is a defense mechanism. You don't want to see the storm coming because that means admitting you might lose everything you've built. So we kept trading. We kept depositing. We kept believing. And FTX kept rising. By mid-2022, SBF's face was on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, Bloomberg. His net worth was estimated at $26 billion. He was testifying before Congress, bailing out failing crypto firms, positioning himself as the savior of a broken market. He wasn't just the richest man in crypto, he was the conscience of crypto. But that's the cruel thing about illusions. They don't shatter slowly. They break all at once. The empire he built looked indestructible, but under the weight of leverage, lies, and unchecked power, all it needed was one push, one spark to turn the belief system into a firestorm. And that spark came from the unlikeliest place of all, a single tweet.
It started quietly, the way most catastrophes do. No explosions, no alarms, just a single post on Twitter. On November 2, 2022, CoinDesk published an article revealing leaked financial documents from Alameda Research. The numbers didn't add up. Alameda's balance sheet was built largely on FTT, the native token issued by FTX itself, not on cash, Bitcoin, or stablecoins, but on an asset they had essentially created out of thin air. Worse, Alameda had borrowed billions using that same token as collateral. That article was like pulling one thread from a sweater. Everything began to unravel. The market read between the lines. If FTT's value dropped, Alameda would face margin calls. If Alameda fell, it would drag FTX down with it. Within hours, the market reacted. Whales started offloading FTT. Retail traders panicked. Twitter lit up with charts showing the price collapsing. Then came the tweet that turned fear into a stampede. Due to recent revelations, Binance will liquidate all remaining FTT holdings. CZ, CEO of Binance. That single sentence was the shot that started the run. I was in my trading room when I saw it. The market froze for a moment, that kind of eerie silence before chaos. Then it hit. The price of FTT fell off a cliff, dropping more than 80% in less than 48 hours. Withdrawals from FTX surged. Users flooded the exchange, trying to pull their funds before it was too late. And I was one of them. I remember staring at the withdrawal screen, refreshing every few seconds. Processing. Then, error. Please try again later. That's when it hit me. The system wasn't working. Billions of dollars were locked, and the people who had once trusted SBF the most were now realizing there was no liquidity left. In the following days, FTX's entire facade collapsed at a speed I'd never seen before. The company paused withdrawals. SBF went silent. The same investors and influencers who had once praised him were now deleting tweets, distancing themselves, rewriting history in real time. And just like that, FTX went from savior to scammer overnight.
I remember feeling disbelief at first, not anger, not even panic, just a hollow, sinking realization that everything we thought was real wasn't. Traders who had spent years building portfolios saw them vanish in hours. Funds got trapped, accounts frozen, futures liquidated. It wasn't just about money, it was about trust, the one currency crypto can't survive without. Every great market collapse has the same anatomy: overconfidence, opacity, and leverage. This time was the difference how personal it felt. We had shaken SBF's hand. We had believed his words. We had built our trading systems on a foundation that, it turns out, was a mirage. In the following days, chaos spread through the entire crypto ecosystem. Bitcoin dropped below $16,000. Luna, Celsius, Voyager, names already wounded from previous crashes, were dragged down further. Investors, once fearless, now looked at every exchange, every DeFi protocol, and asked the same question: is my money safe? The answer, increasingly, was no. Inside trading communities, chat rooms turned silent. Nobody was bragging about profits anymore. It wasn't a bear market, it was a trust crisis. And in markets, when trust dies, liquidity dies with it. Then came the headlines. FTX files for bankruptcy. Billions in customer funds missing. SBF under investigation. It didn't feel real. Just weeks earlier, the man was on magazine covers and government panels. Now he was on the run, sleeping on beanbags, giving desperate interviews, claiming he didn't mean to. But for those of us who lost funds or faith, the damage was already done. The dream of a decentralized, fair, and transparent financial world had taken its hardest hit yet. The truth is, it wasn't just FTX that collapsed. It was the illusion that crypto had outgrown the corruption of traditional finance. We learned that human greed doesn't disappear with technology, it just adapts to it. When the smoke cleared, I looked at my balance sheet. Some accounts gone, others drained. But the real loss wasn't measured in dollars, it was in conviction. For the first time in years, I didn't open the charts the next morning. I just sat there, watching the candle that represented FTT's final fall flicker into nothing. The market had spoken, and it was merciless.
In the weeks after the collapse, everything felt hollow. The charts were moving, but it didn't feel like a market anymore. It felt like a funeral. Exchanges rushed to post proof of reserves, as if screenshots could rebuild trust. Influencers who once preached "not your keys, not your coins" were now repeating it like an apology. And traders, myself included, were left asking the same quiet question. Were we blind, or were we lied to? I remember joining a private Zoom call with a few veteran traders I've known for years. Normally, our conversations are full of strategy, setups, and opportunities, but that day, there was only silence, the kind that stretches too long. Then one of them said, "It's over. The retail cycle's dead." And for a while, it felt like he was right. FTX wasn't just another exchange going under. It was the symbol of legitimacy in crypto. When FTX fell, it wasn't just about money, it was about the myth of progress. We told ourselves crypto was different, that blockchain was trustless, that decentralization would protect us. But in the end, it wasn't code that failed, it was people. That realization hit hard. I started reviewing old interviews of SBF, the ones where he talked about effective altruism and earning to give. He wasn't the typical Wall Street villain. He wore t-shirts, played video games, and spoke like an awkward genius. He seemed too nerdy to be corrupt, and that's what made it dangerous. Because his image was the brand. He didn't just sell financial products, he sold credibility.
And we bought it. The crash changed the way I saw everything. For the first time in my 15 years of trading, I questioned the entire ecosystem. Not just the tokens, but the people behind them. The venture funds, the influencers, the exchanges pretending to be for the people while quietly leveraging user deposits. Crypto had always been a game of asymmetric information. Whales versus retail, insiders versus dreamers. But after FTX, the mask came off. It wasn't just an unfair game. It was a rigged one. Retail traders began disappearing from the scene. Discord servers went quiet. YouTube channels stopped posting. Even the word crypto became a punchline in mainstream finance. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build, seconds to break, and sometimes it never returns. I'd spent months rebuilding my systems, my mindset, my risk models. But what I struggled to rebuild most was belief. The belief that this market was worth fighting for. Because how do you keep faith in a system that keeps betraying its own ideals? There was one night, around December 2022, when Bitcoin dropped below $15,500. I was watching the chart alone in my office, screens glowing in the dark. I didn't even feel panic anymore, just numbness. Then a message popped up in one of my private groups. FTX owes $8 billion. Alameda misused client funds. The number barely registered. After everything, it didn't even shock me. But what came next did. One of the traders, a young guy, maybe 24, wrote, "I'm done. Lost everything. I can't do this anymore." Then he went offline. No one heard from him again. That message stuck with me, because it wasn't just one trader's loss. It was a reflection of an entire generation that came to the market chasing freedom and found despair instead. I realized then that what collapsed wasn't just a company, it was the collective spirit of retail traders. The people who once believed that through effort, skill, and risk, they could change their lives. That belief had died, at least for now. But something in me refused to stay down. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was survival instinct. Or maybe it was that tiny, irrational spark that makes every trader come back after a loss. Because deep down, I knew the market doesn't care about who's right or wrong. It just tests who can adapt. And maybe, just maybe, this was another test. The kind that separates those who are only here for profit from those who came here for purpose.
When the dust settled, everyone started asking the same question. How did no one see this coming? The truth is, the signs were always there. We just didn't want to believe them. On paper, FTX and Alameda Research were supposed to be two separate entities, one an exchange, the other a trading firm. But in reality, they were two hands of the same body, moving in perfect synchronization. And that body was feeding on user deposits. The line between custodian and counterparty was blurred, dangerously so. FTX customers thought they were holding their own funds. In reality, those funds were being loaned, leveraged, and recycled through a maze of internal transactions. It was a digital version of shadow banking, wrapped in a Silicon Valley smile. Here's the anatomy of what went wrong. Step 1. Alameda made massive speculative bets across the crypto ecosystem, from early-stage token investments to leveraged futures positions. They made money during the bull run, sure, but as the market turned in 2022, those bets started bleeding fast. Step 2. To cover the mounting losses, Alameda began dipping into FTX's customer deposits, billions of dollars that were never meant to be touched. No formal disclosure, no board oversight, just a quiet siphoning from the back room. Step 3. They printed their own collateral, the FTT token, a coin created by FTX, backed by nothing more than confidence. Then they used that same token as proof of solvency. It was circular leverage, a house of cards pretending to be a fortress. The fatal blow came when CoinDesk published a leaked balance sheet showing that a huge portion of Alameda's assets were denominated in FTT. The illusion of liquidity shattered overnight. Then came CZ from Binance, posting one tweet that read like an obituary. Due to recent revelations, we will be liquidating our remaining FTT holdings. That single line detonated the market. Panic spread faster than any contagion model could predict. Withdrawals flooded in. In less than 72 hours, over $6 billion was pulled from FTX. The exchange froze, withdrawals halted, and the illusion of solvency evaporated in real time. It wasn't a crash, it was a cardiac arrest. But here's what most people still don't understand. FTX didn't fail because of volatility. It failed because of hubris, the kind that makes intelligent people believe they're untouchable. Sam Bankman-Fried wasn't your typical scam artist. He wasn't hiding on a yacht or fleeing to Dubai. He was sitting in interviews, calmly talking about ethics and philanthropy, while orchestrating one of the largest misappropriations of customer funds in history. It's easy to paint him as the villain, and don't get me wrong, he deserves the blame. But the truth runs deeper. The ecosystem enabled him. Investors ignored red flags because they wanted access to the next unicorn. Media platforms glorified him because he fit the narrative, the young genius reshaping finance. And regulators? They were too busy debating definitions while billions disappeared. Every bubble needs a hero, a story, and a justification. FTX had all three. And that's why no one stopped it, because it felt too good to question. When I looked at the autopsy reports, the internal emails, and the bankruptcy filings, one detail hit me hardest. FTX's risk management team consisted of fewer than 10 people. For an exchange handling tens of billions of dollars, that's insanity. Worse, many key executives were friends, roommates, or even dating. It wasn't a company, it was a social club managing global capital. And when the pressure hit, the whole thing imploded like a psychological experiment gone wrong. The market called it a black swan. But let's be honest, this wasn't unpredictable. It was a white swan, obvious, visible, and ignored because greed blinds even the most experienced eyes. And when it all fell apart, retail traders took the hit. Again. Because that's how it always goes. Insiders build the game, retail funds it. Then, when the tide goes out, everyone acts surprised. For me, dissecting FTX wasn't about blame, it was about understanding. Because every collapse leaves behind patterns, and every pattern leaves behind a map. A map showing where the next storm might come from. And trust me, the next one is already forming.
There's a reason every great bubble in history starts the same way, with a story. Not a chart, not a metric, a story. A story about freedom, about revolution, about how this time is different. And in 2020, 2021, that story was crypto's heartbeat. We weren't just buying Bitcoin or Solana or FTT, we were buying the narrative that the old world was dying and a new one was being born. Wall Street was obsolete. Central banks were corrupt. The future was decentralized, open, fair. It was intoxicating. And like every intoxicant, it made us feel invincible. I remember watching traders, even veterans, say things like, "This isn't a bubble, it's a paradigm shift." I said it too. We all did. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The line between belief and blindness is razor thin. FTX wasn't the first con dressed as innovation. It was just the latest iteration of an ancient pattern, the illusion of control fueled by collective euphoria. When prices go up, we mistake luck for skill. When narratives align with profit, we stop questioning. That's not stupidity, that's human nature. See, the market doesn't just expose greed, it amplifies it. Because greed in finance isn't about money, it's about validation. We don't crave dollars, we crave being right. The deeper I looked at FTX, the clearer it became that this wasn't just Sam's greed, it was ours too. The investors, the influencers, the traders who kept repeating the same comforting lie. Crypto is unstoppable. We wanted to believe in the hero. We wanted a new messiah of finance. And Sam fit the archetype perfectly. Young, quirky, genius, different. We projected our hopes onto him. We made him more than human. We made him inevitable. That's what markets do when they fall in love with a narrative. They build gods out of men, and then they crucify them when reality shows up. Every generation has its own financial religion. Ours was decentralization. But what we forgot was that even decentralized systems are run by people, and people bring their flaws with them. The psychology behind this is simple but brutal. Humans crave certainty in an uncertain world. We'd rather believe a beautiful lie than confront a chaotic truth. That's why FTX could exist, not because the scam was hidden, but because it told us what we wanted to hear. Your money is safe. We're the adults in the room. We're here for the long term. Each phrase was designed to soothe the part of the brain that hates uncertainty, the limbic system that governs fear and comfort. And when enough people believe, the story becomes reality, until it doesn't. I've seen this cycle before, in 2008, in 2017, in every new era of finance. Each time the faces change, the technology evolves, but the psychology stays the same. The crowd chases certainty. The insiders exploit that need. And the collapse comes when reality reasserts itself. For traders, understanding this is more than theory. It's survival. Because markets don't reward intelligence, they reward discipline. You can have all the data, all the models, all the algorithms. But if you can't control your own mind, the market will do it for you. When I look back on my own behavior during the FTX years, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't immune to the illusion. I wanted to believe too. Because believing is easier than being skeptical when everyone else is celebrating. That's the paradox of greed. It feels rational when shared by the crowd. And yet, when it all collapses, we call it madness. I often say the market doesn't punish greed, it punishes unexamined greed. And FTX was the ultimate example. We didn't just lose money, we lost a mirror that forced us to confront who we really are when faced with easy gains and charismatic leaders. Because behind every bubble is a collective confession. We all wanted it to be true.
The morning after FTX filed for bankruptcy, I opened my trading terminal, and for a second, I just stared at it. Bitcoin, down 25%. Ethereum, bleeding. Altcoins, obliterated. And it wasn't just the numbers, it was the silence. The chat rooms, the Telegram groups, even crypto Twitter, all muted. The usual noise of optimism had evaporated overnight. That silence told me everything. The collapse of FTX wasn't just a financial event, it was an emotional reset for an entire industry. Because when a company that big, that trusted, that interconnected goes down, it doesn't fall alone. It drags the entire ecosystem into its gravity well. Within days, contagion began to spread. Lending platforms like BlockFi and Genesis froze withdrawals. Exchanges rushed to prove proof of reserves, some showing on-chain addresses, others fumbling to find auditors willing to sign off. Funds quietly marked down assets they had publicly praised weeks earlier. Every partnership, every sponsorship deal, every influencer endorsement, suddenly radioactive. Crypto had become a trust crisis, not a liquidity crisis. The irony was painful. The entire industry had been built on the idea of trustless systems, code instead of contracts, decentralization instead of dependence. Yet in practice, so much of it hinged on one man's word and a logo that said FTX. It was the biggest identity check crypto had ever faced. For regulators, it was open season. Politicians who once posed with crypto CEOs started calling for accountability. Senators who couldn't tell Bitcoin from blockchain now used FTX as shorthand for the danger of unregulated finance. And for once, they weren't entirely wrong. The collapse exposed what many of us insiders already knew. The gap between what crypto promised and what it delivered had grown dangerously wide. But in the rubble, something unexpected started to happen. Projects that had long operated quietly, decentralized protocols, on-chain lending, self-custody wallets, began to shine. Not because they were perfect, but because they were transparent. You could see their balance sheets in real time. You didn't need to trust them. You could verify. The industry started to mature, painfully, but necessarily. Retail investors became more skeptical, asking harder questions. Institutions pulled back, but the ones who stayed became far more selective. The era of blind speculation gave way to a new kind of diligence. And for traders like me, it was humbling. The FTX shock didn't just wipe portfolios, it reshaped habits. People started talking again about cold wallets, on-chain data, and counterparty risk, terms that had almost vanished during the euphoria of 2021. It felt like crypto was growing up the hard way. But the ripple effect went beyond finance. It hit culture, too. Crypto influencers who once flaunted luxury lifestyles vanished overnight. Communities once obsessed with when Lambo started asking, what now? The memes got darker, the tone more introspective. And under that surface shift, something profound was happening. For the first time in years, people stopped chasing hype and started chasing truth. Developers began building tools for transparency, open-source dashboards, automated audits, and smart contracts that limited human control. Even the language of crypto changed. Words like safety, accountability, and risk management became fashionable again. It was like the entire industry went through detox. And just like any detox, it was ugly at first, the withdrawal from greed, the shaking off of denial. But gradually, a quieter, more grounded movement started forming. By mid-2023, a phrase began circulating among the old traders, post-FTX crypto. Not a new bull market, not a comeback story, but an acknowledgement that the Wild West era had ended. The dream of financial freedom wasn't dead, it was just finally facing reality. When I look back now, I think of the FTX collapse as crypto's adolescence, the painful moment when the industry realized it wasn't invincible, that maturity would cost it its innocence. And maybe that's what had to happen. Because no market, no technology can earn legitimacy until it's been tested by betrayal. FTX didn't destroy crypto. It forced it to grow up.
I remember the night the news became official. FTX had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The ticker on my second monitor kept flashing red, like a heartbeat fading away. I sat there, not angry, not panicked, just empty. 15 years of trading had taught me how to handle loss, but this wasn't just a trade gone wrong. It felt like a betrayal of belief. I had funds on FTX.
Not a huge amount. I'd learned that lesson years ago. But I also had positions tied to FTT, exposure through yield platforms, and more importantly, a network of friends and colleagues whose portfolios were intertwined with that ecosystem. When the withdrawals stopped, so did the illusion of safety. Over the next few days, I went through every emotional phase you could imagine. Denial, they'll find liquidity. Anger, how could Sam do this? Bargaining, maybe if Binance steps in. And then, the crash into acceptance. But this time, I didn't rage. I reflected. Because deep down, I knew I chose to believe in FTX. I'd ignored the red flags, the lack of transparency, the too-good-to-be-true sponsorships, the way everyone seemed a little too comfortable. And that, I realized, was the most dangerous emotion in trading. Comfort. Comfort blinds you. It makes you forget that every market, traditional or crypto, runs on risk. You can never outsource vigilance. Not to a company, not to a genius CEO, not even to a friend who sounds convincing on Twitter. That realization hit harder than any liquidation. For weeks, I didn't trade. I went silent. I deleted every exchange app from my phone, moved everything to cold storage, and just stepped back. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. Every day, I wrote down what I'd felt, what I'd learned, and what I wished I'd done differently. Some days, it was just one sentence. Never confuse trust with laziness. Other days, it turned into full pages of frustration and self-critique. And slowly, through that process, I began to understand something profound. The real loss wasn't money. It was the erosion of faith in my own discernment. Because when you've been in the markets for over a decade, you start to believe you can smell bullshit from miles away. FTX humbled that belief. It reminded me that no one is immune to persuasion, not even the experienced ones. But humility, I've learned, can be the foundation of resilience. So I rebuilt, differently this time. I went back to first principles: custody, transparency, and verifiable proof. I set up systems for on-chain tracking, created checklists for due diligence, and refused to allocate capital to anything that didn't publish its wallet addresses. If a project couldn't withstand sunlight, it didn't deserve my money. I also rebuilt emotionally. I stopped chasing every new trend and started focusing on edge, studying liquidity flow, market structure, macro triggers, the things that had always mattered but got drowned out during the hype. And when I returned to trading, I treated every position like a soldier on borrowed time, disciplined, risk-managed, unromantic. But the biggest change wasn't technical. It was philosophical. I used to think trading was about prediction. Now I think it's about adaptation. Because you can't control markets. You can only control how honestly you respond to them. FTX forced me to face myself, the part that wanted easy narratives, the part that mistook momentum for wisdom. And in losing that illusion, I found something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. These days, when I open my terminal, I don't look for excitement. I look for structure. When I study a chart, I don't see opportunity, I see probability. And when I enter a trade, I don't think about profits. I think about process. Because if there's one thing the collapse taught me, it's this: you can lose money and recover. But once you lose discipline, you lose everything. The market doesn't punish mistakes, it punishes denial. And I had been in denial for too long. So when people ask me now, did you lose much in the FTX collapse?
I tell them, yes, but not in the way you think. I lost illusions. I lost arrogance. And those were the most valuable losses I've ever taken. Because from those ashes, I rebuilt something far more important than a portfolio. Conviction grounded in truth.
The dust has settled. FTX is gone. The headlines have faded. But the echo of that collapse still lives in every trader's subconscious. A quiet reminder that trust is fragile. In the aftermath, crypto didn't die. It evolved. Bitcoin kept printing blocks. Ethereum continued to process transactions. The code didn't fail. The people did. And that distinction, to me, is the foundation for everything that comes next. When I talk to younger traders now, I often tell them, FTX wasn't the end of crypto. It was the end of blind faith. And that's a good thing. Because trust, when rebuilt consciously, becomes stronger than before. It forces the industry to grow up, to face the mirror and fix its reflection. The months that followed the collapse felt like winter in the markets. Liquidity dried up, retail fled, and the noise vanished. But winter in trading isn't just a season of loss. It's a season of purification. When the hype burns away, only the real builders remain. And in that silence, innovation begins again. I saw it firsthand. Developers doubled down on transparency. Proof of reserves became a standard, not a luxury. Projects started publishing wallet addresses and audit trails. Custodial solutions evolved, blending DeFi verification with TradFi compliance. It was as if the entire space had collectively whispered, "Never again." Of course, not everyone listened. There are still scams, illusions, and shortcuts. But the culture shifted. The narrative matured. Crypto stopped being about easy money and started being about resilient systems. And personally, that gave me hope. Because after FTX, I wasn't sure if I could believe again. Not just in the markets, but in the idea of decentralization. In the dream that money could exist outside the reach of corruption and incompetence. But over time, I realized that the dream itself wasn't broken. Only the stewards of it were. The blockchain never lied. Humans did. So the solution wasn't to abandon the technology. It was to demand better humans. That's why I started mentoring again. I began hosting small sessions with traders and builders, not to teach them how to make money, but how to think clearly. We talked about risk, skepticism, the importance of self-custody, and the psychology of herd behavior. And in those conversations, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: humility mixed with ambition. The next generation isn't naive. They've seen the wreckage. They know that no logo, no influencer, no billionaire genius is immune to failure. And that's what will save them. Markets always move in cycles: boom, bust, rebuild, repeat. But beneath that volatility lies a deeper rhythm: evolution. Each crash refines the collective intelligence of traders. Each failure hardens the system. The market, like nature, rewards those who adapt. As I look ahead, I don't predict prices anymore. I study behavior, institutional flows, regulatory signals, global liquidity patterns. The next bull market won't be built on hype. It'll be built on credibility. And those who learn the lessons of FTX will be ready for it. Sometimes I still think back to that night, the empty screen, the silence, the disbelief. But now it feels distant, like a scar that's healed, leaving behind tougher skin. Because in the end, the market doesn't remember your wins or losses. It remembers your discipline. And discipline, once forged in crisis, becomes unbreakable.
So when I record this story, when I share it with you, it's not nostalgia. It's a warning, a confession, and maybe a small dose of hope. Because if there's one universal truth I've learned in 15 years of trading, it's this. The market never rewards comfort. It rewards conviction. And conviction isn't built in bull runs. It's built in collapses like FTX. When the lights go out and all that's left is your belief in your process. That's where real traders are born. So as we look toward the future, whether it's Bitcoin ETFs, on-chain treasuries, or AI-driven liquidity networks, remember, innovation will always outpace regulation. And greed will always test our ethics. But if we keep our principles intact, transparency, discipline, and humility, then maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild something stronger than before. The market doesn't owe us trust. We have to earn it back. And that's what this journey, my journey, is really about. Master yourself. Then master the markets.